The Jedi Order was barely born when it nearly tore itself apart. On Ossus, a young Jedi dared to ask a simple question: who decides which paths of the Force are forbidden? The answer from the Jedi hierarchy was swift and absolute. But Xendor of Kashi Mer was not the kind of man who accepted absolutes. He walked away, and thousands followed him into war. This is the story of the First Schism, the first time the Jedi fought themselves. Greetings, my fellow scruffy-looking Nerf Herders, and welcome back to the Infernal Brotherhood. Today we're exploring one of the earliest and most consequential fractures in Jedi history, the First Great Schism. Long before the rise of the Sith Lords as we know them, before Exar Kun or Revan or Darth Bane, the greatest threat to the Jedi Order came not from ancient darkness, but from within. A dispute over knowledge, freedom, and the right to study the Force without restriction ignited a war that spread across the Republic itself and left wounds that would never fully heal. To understand the First Schism, we have to go back to the founding of the Jedi Order itself. As we explored in a previous episode, the Jedi emerged from the ashes of the Force Wars on Tython, survivors of the Jedi Order who rejected balance and dedicated themselves fully to the light side. They eventually settled on Ossus in the Outer Rim, deliberately distancing themselves from the growing influence of the fledgling Galactic Republic. But even in these earliest days, the Order was hardening. Doctrines were being written, traditions were calcifying, and certain paths of Force study, including the ancient traditions of the Dai Bendu, the Palawa, the Way of the Dark, and others, were being quietly closed off. For most Jedi, this structure felt like wisdom. For one, it felt like a cage. Xendor was a Jedi Knight of the Kashi Mer people, a species with a deep and ancient relationship with the Force, and a tradition that predated the Jedi Order itself. He had already been exiled from his homeworld for embracing the darker aspects of the Force, and he arrived on Ossus with questions the hierarchy was not prepared to answer. Xendor did not sneak away in secret. He petitioned the Jedi Council openly and directly, requesting permission to leave Ossus and establish a separate academy, a place where alternative Force traditions could be studied freely. He wanted to explore what the Order had declared forbidden, not out of malice, but out of genuine conviction that the Jedi were becoming too exclusionary, too rigid, too afraid of their own knowledge. The Council refused. Xendor left anyway. He found an immediate and devoted ally in Arden Lin, a young steel hand of Palawa, a warrior tradition with its own ancient Force philosophy. She shared his frustration, particularly with the Order's growing embrace of the pacifist Kamasi philosophy, which she saw as incompatible with her own heritage. Together, they departed for the world of Leto. On Leto, Xendor and Arden Lin established their academy. What began as a school quickly became a movement. Increasingly large groups of Jedi and Force-sensitive students abandoned Ossus to join them, drawn by the promise of knowledge without restriction and freedom without hierarchy. These followers became known as the Legions of Leto. They pledged themselves not to an emperor or a dark lord, but to an idea that no council had the right to decide which aspects of the Force were permissible. They embraced passion and emotion, rejected rigid structure, and drew freely on the dark side, not as a weapon of conquest, but as an expression of individual freedom. It is worth pausing here because history has not been entirely kind in its telling of this story. As Danzigoro Potts, one of the few historians willing to ask uncomfortable questions, observed centuries later, perhaps the Jedi were partly to blame. Xendor's original conquest was not unreasonable. The traditions he wished to study were ancient and legitimate. The war did not begin with darkness. It began with a refusal to listen. Accounts differ on who fired first. Some historians record that Xendor, furious and unwilling to negotiate further, led the legions in an assault on Ossus itself, hoping to end the conflict quickly before it consumed the Republic. Others, including Arden Lyn herself speaking millennia later, insist it was the Jedi who raised an army first and declared war on the legions. What is beyond dispute is that war came, and it spread fast. Battles erupted on Ossus, Chandrila, Brental, Coruscant, and Metellus. Xendor even attempted to turn the young Republic against the Jedi, warning that the Order would disguise itself as protector while quietly scheming for power. The Republic did not listen. The legions fought with passion, skill, and fury, but they carried a fundamental disadvantage. Their philosophy of radical individualism made coordinated warfare nearly impossible. The Jedi, by contrast, fought as one, their dedication to order allowing them to subsume individual will into something larger, something close to what would later be called a battle meld. Arden Lyn herself later admitted this was decisive. The end came at Columbus. Xendor faced the Jedi Master Ardristapina, known as the Green Blade, in single combat, and was slain. The Legion's heart was cut out. Victory over Xendor was not enough for the Jedi. Forces under Pina were dispatched to Leto to exterminate the last of the legions entirely. The survivors fought long enough to scatter, fleeing beyond the borders of Republic space into the unknown. Arden Lyn ran furthest. Pina pursued her into regions of space that only Xendor had ever charted. He cornered her on Irkalla. The final duel was ferocious. Pina disarmed her, but Lyn, unwilling to surrender, channeled everything she had left: grief, rage, love of Xendor, and despair of everything she believed had been taken from them through an ancient Kashi Mer talisman. The surge of dark side energy destroyed Pina's blade and mortally wounded him. With his dying strength, Pina called upon his unique force ability, Morikro, a rare technique capable of slowing another's bodily functions to a near stop. He cast Arden Lyn into a deep force stasis. She would not wake for 24,496 years, not until the Imperial era. With the legions destroyed, the Jedi Order withdrew to Ossus. For centuries, they kept a deliberately low profile, working quietly as the Republic's secret defenders on the Rim, checking Hutt expansion into vulnerable colonies and keeping the militaristic Tion cluster divided. They would not openly declare themselves to the Republic again for nearly 500 years, until the Taiwanese War forced their hand. The First Great Schism left no monuments. The legions of Leto were erased so thoroughly that few in the core worlds gave them a second thought. But the questions Xendor raised never truly went away. Who decides which aspects of the Force are forbidden? What happens when structure becomes oppression? And what is lost when an order grows too afraid of its own knowledge to ask? The Jedi would face those questions again and again and again. The First Great Schism was not a story of a Dark Lord rising to power. It was something quieter and more unsettling. A philosopher who asked a question the hierarchy refused to answer, and a war that resulted from that refusal. Whether Xendor was a visionary or a cautionary tale depends entirely on who is writing the history, and in the Star Wars Legends universe, that ambiguity is exactly what makes stories like this one worth telling. If you enjoy this deep dive into ancient Jedi history, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing the video. And as always, your support through Patreon or channel memberships helps the Infernal Brotherhood continue exploring the deep history of the Star Wars Legends universe. Until we convene again, my fellow scruffy-looking Nerf Herders, may the Force be with you.